PlayStation 1 trilogy turned out to be pretty good. If this was it, I'd happily put hands into my pockets and walk with smile on my face into the sunset. But wait, there is so much more. And if you want to know what Ace Combat really means, you ought to play through PlayStation 2 titles too. The Holy Trinity, the golden age of Ace Combat, the era of newly developed high-end hardware enabling the power of 3D. In order to understand Ace Combat, one has to appreciate the origins of every feature that has been added over the years. Ace Combat 1 created the core gameplay loop, Ace Combat 2 perfected it, and Ace Combat 3 experimented a lot, and each success or failure laid groundwork for the upcoming generational leap. And Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies was about to receive its new identity, the anti-war masterpiece. Alright, that sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? A game in which you shoot down hundreds of planes, and I'm not even speaking about the hundreds of destroyed ground targets that are, though only by implication, surely operated by some poor conscripted subs. How could this be anti-war, you may ask? YouTube channel Storytellers points out that a good anti-war movie portrays a war as a brutal and careless event where thousands die a pointless death. One cannot have an anti-war game without revealing for what the war really stands for. Just look at other games that try to spread the anti-war message, such as Metal Gear Solid with its "War has changed" and Fallout with "War never changes." Pick one, choose one. But if you think about it closely, both are correct. The way in which we wage the war changes. Its nature stays, and suddenly, yes, it makes sense that even an arcade game where a player indiscriminately kills with help of billion-dollar equipment and push a few buttons is a perfect candidate for an anti-war game. The adrenaline-inducing rock or futuristic jungle shifts towards more serious classical orchestral themes, mixed with the previous two a little bit. Colors are washed out and bleak. Advanced 3D visuals are attempting to give us resemblance of a real place that might as well be a lived-in nearby neighborhood. And instead of yellow bingo message evoking a score increase in an arcade game, this time a successful takedown is announced by purely utilitarian destroyed. And instead of following the also popular Cold War or World War II sentiment that is commonly present within many anti-war pieces, all of it happens on the allegorical Earth instead, the one from Ace Combat 3, Strangeville, on the continent of Usia, where in future corporations will rule. But no worries, that story has happened already in Ace Combat 3. One thing that somewhat annoys me is how vaguely defined all the countries and cultures are. I would certainly appreciate if the game gave me some idea about the warring nations, but fictional environment is not without its merits. Imagine that meteorite storms were a thing that endangered our daily existence. Look, a falling star, have a last wish, and naturally, humanity in its glory creates a solution. Stonehenge. One must love the poetic resemblance of several megacannons in circle compared to the Neolithic menhir monument present in Great Britain, which may also have served as a tool for ancient astronomers, whereas the Strange Reels version shreds through invading rocks from space. Pow pow pow. But the same way dynamite was invented to be a mining equipment, it's not that difficult to realize the potential of such superweapon, unobstructed air superiority. And thus Eurasia, takes hold of Stonehenge by force, and subsequently majority of the continent begins to crumble under their air superiority, becoming a mere trophy in the collection. And there you are, one of the pilots from the retreating armies, desperately trying to hold back invaders on several eastern islands that are out of Stonehenge's reach. What follows encapsulates a soon-to-become classic Ace Combat formula. A major war that, thanks to you, the GigaChat Ace, is won in an unlikely success across many battlefields that ultimately allows to maintain existence of sovereign states, which eventually end up fighting again, because history comes in waves and we desperately need more Ace Combat games for humanity's survival. And that's a hard fact. The advances in gameplay are predictably obvious. Visuals are slicker, controls tighter. They did it better, faster, stronger.
Better, faster, stronger.
It's always a pleasure to fly planes that truly resemble their real-life counterparts, and Ace Combat 4 and all the following PlayStation 2 games absolutely make for an enjoyable flight experience, whether it's true to reality or not. And overall, first impressions are granted to be positive, coming from the previous console generation. One of my favorite features is the resupply line. Since the missions are longer, the game allows you to leave the scenario temporarily and spend some time landing on the airfield, where you can repair and resupply your plane. This especially comes in handy because checkpoints won't be a thing anytime soon, and not only it prevents potential softlock if you run out of ammunition, it also removes the necessity of restarting the mission if you take too much damage too early or equip a wrong weapon. It also comes bundled together with landing minigame that is both enjoyable and skippable. One thing that bothered me a little is that using return line could break a flow of some missions, and occasionally it's a little bit abusable. Needless to say, Ace Combat 4 is not without its growing pains. Special weapons are a welcome addition, yet their poor balance mostly advocates for use of 4 air-to-air or 4 air-to-ground missiles only, which is not only overpowered compared to bombs and unguided rockets, but perhaps the only truly viable option in many missions, especially if you decide to play on hard as I did. Much bigger stigma, however, comes from the mission design. I have this theory that Project Aces was very much aware of how restrictive the mission design in Ace Combat 3 was, so instead they had it in the exact opposite direction. At no point we shall dictate to the player what they should do in the mission. So listen, player, we have created these wonderful, massive war scenarios. Operation Sandstorm-like advance, massive furball battle with dozens of planes dogfighting all at once, mountain region with rivers and jungles, and many hidden targets. And here, dear player, you can go wild. Go on, do the stuff you like all you want, how you want. Well, problem 1 is solved, but problem 2 is created, because now, without any objectives and absolute freedom at hand, how do you define a win condition? So, in order to solve this problem, a point system has been created. Each enemy is worth certain amount of points. Almost every mission has a time limit, and all you need to win is to gather enough points to fulfill the limit. Do you see the problem now? Not only the lack of direct objectives has a side effect that forces the player to fly around like a headless chicken and potentially forces you to repeat the mission, which can be quite a nuisance if you score barely below the point limit. But more importantly, the anti-war messaging gets kneecapped from behind by the hand of mighty game designer. Ace Combat 4 has this wonderful feature of open communication chatter that is meant to humanize both co-fighters and enemy combatants. The communications are pretty simple, generic combat chatter that however serves as a powerful reminder that the squares you're shooting at or fighting alongside with are individuals. Individuals that panic when facing the imminent death, or cheer at you when your rockets finally allow them to push through heavily fortified enemy front lines. Yet, at the end of the day, Ace Combat 4 by design takes all the heavily earned impression of war, whether through serious theme and tonal shift, the arcadization of the franchise, and humanization of the participants, and turns it even more absurd arcade score rush, because at the end of the day, the foes you stand against become a little score number, a quota, a necessity to pass through a level in a video game. As Stalin once said, one death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. And Ace Combat 4, though by accident, came to similarly cynical conclusion. What's worse, if the score is what you're after, the game already has such system in place in form of ranking system. Based on your performance, you receive more additional funds the higher your rank is. So not only this less visible ranking system is already there for the players who want the concrete feedback on how well they did and appropriate reward for good performance, it simply makes the score rush missions feel redundant. Despite this, I still can't stress enough how the scenarios in Ace Combat 4 are still so grand and impressive. A small kid in me was both overjoyed and satisfied, but the themes of war is hell, war is cool, and war is a game clash nonetheless. But I promised an anti-war masterpiece, so where is it? Not where the missions are. See, Ace Combat 4 has two stories. One is the story of Mobius 1, the player, as Maxor would put it, a minute sociopath that is immune to extreme Gs and possibly autistic. Then there is a story of Yellow 13 and the little boy, and I will let my biggest criticism out of the way, as it is truly the only one. Imagine you would skip all the story cutscenes. Your gameplay experience would end up being nearly identical. Now do the same with all the missions. And your story experience is also unchanged. The connection is low-key there, but the anti-war masterpiece is not about you, the player. You are but a background noise, loose connection and loose cannon, the guy on the other side of the front line. The story is as disconnected from the gameplay as its genius. It is a well-written ode to human nature and how war affects people's lives, even if the front line is as distant as your dreams. It's about duality of man, how we can find comfort even in our worst enemies, and how naivety and sense of knighthood doesn't excuse our action or inaction. The story follows a boy who is writing a letter to us, the player, about the opposing ace, Yellow number 13. It begins abruptly. A boy's family dies after Yellow 13 shoots down a plane directly on his house.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
I found this scene to be pretty hilarious because it came out of nowhere and before I could even connect with the character and the setting. The boy then has to move to live with his uncle, a taxi driver in a nearby town. As the story progresses, many themes of life under occupation are examined. Fuel shortages, forced re-education into different language, constant presence of soldiers and military police, and overall tense atmosphere of uncertain future. It is ironic that such lawful transition seems almost like a respect-worthy invasion, in contrast with atrocities committed by Russians in Ukraine. But the fact that there is a thematic overlap between Strange Real's power struggle and real-life event happening right now just a couple 100 kilometers away from me made it hit even harder. But it's not just this sentiment that puts the story on the pedestal. There are countless clever subversions served to you in neatly illustrated and outspoken format that, unlike Ace Combat 3, doesn't take hours to distill. First, there is your uncle, who hates the invaders and collaborators alike, but mostly just due to the fact that the fuel shortage made his livelihood of taxi driver impossible. There is a bar owner and his family that serves to invaders, and everyone hates them for it. Yet in reality, they are working for resistance, gathering intelligence, which is a great risk, especially since they are fighting for the losing side. And finally, there is friendship. Friendship between the boy, who plays harmonica in said bar to make some change, and Yellow 13, who appears there one day. It's a bittersweet story of fuming hatred that the boy feels towards indirect killer of his parents, and companionship, as the squadron leader, through his non-judgmental persona and charisma, wins the boy over and becomes his new father figure, without ever really being told by the boy that it was he who indirectly orphaned him. Eventually, the boy moves to live with Yellow Squadron on nearby improvised airport, and they start to treat him as family, showing how even invaders can be people too, even if they've been doing many wrongs, whether intentionally or not, as even they have their homes and loved ones somewhere out there. Who knows how and why they ended up serving, and even they want to be accepted and part of the society. And I like the message a lot, but I was almost certain that I will be able to call this war story out, because like any other financially viable product, it will surely lack one thing. It always does. The balls to speak its message out loud. But then it came. They came. The testicular objects have arrived. It happens on a day when you, the player, and Liberation Army manage to drive back the invaders, and the fighting is closing on the town. Barkeep's daughter is nearly caught while sabotaging the defending troops and hides behind a car. Yellow 13 is sitting in said car and catches her.
It was Yellow 13. He knew she was responsible for planting the bomb on their runway as well. The face of the enemy whom he hated belonged to someone close to him. "Get out of our town, you fascist pig." Those were the words from my mouth. I've never seen his face twist so painfully. "Do you hate us that much?" We couldn't shake or nod our heads in reply. It seemed like an eternity passed before he said go and released us.
Whether it was boy's rage against the killer of his parents, hatred for the invader, or just a message from the writers to the player, at that moment I knew that Ace Combat 4 is not afraid to name just the victims, but also the perpetrators. It is not afraid to call out a nationalistic, imperialistic plague, even though with one line, that has been a bane of society since dawn of our existence. Whether it's wearing hammer and sickle, Hakenkreuz, letter Z, or any other arbitrary symbol of control over others through pure selfish desire to take, conquer and control. And Yellow 13, out of all people, is not excluded from this criticism. Even though he cares deeply about his comrades in arms, and is proud they've never been shot down under his command, he doesn't judge nor perpetrate the occupied population, even helps them and tries to see the best in them. He naively believes in chivalry and fair combat, blindsided to the brutality of war that happens deep in the dirt under the noble sky he cruises. Yet, for Ace Combat 4, it is no excuse. The game still goes out and calls him a Nazi. He is not excluded from all the pointless bloodshed and violence, because even he is one of the enablers. He still actively participates in this bloodsport, counting the shootdowns, writing them on the wall as a bunch of trophies. The game still holds Yellow 13 to be responsible, and for that I applaud to Ace Combat 4, as it is easily one of the best stories I have ever seen in a video game. Not because it has a mind-blowing reveal or incredible plotline, but because it believably exposes traits and flaws of human nature through clever storytelling. If Ace Combat 5 is a proof of something, it's that my analysis is on point.
Boo this man!
Alright. Self-praise is smelly, like your mom, and Ace Combat 5 is as massive as her too. Everything that I seemed to have issue with in Ace Combat 4 is addressed here, and they packed 2 kilos of cherries on the top as well. And that gave me a great deal of satisfaction as a video game critic. So, what has changed and how? The missions are now far more objective driven, but many of them still maintain the open-ended battle sets on impressive scale. And if Score Rush was your thing, you can become Mobius 1 for one last time, cleaning up a rebelling Eurasian faction in arcade mode with branching paths. And finally, Ace Combat 5 has above all prioritized combining the story with the actual gameplay. How? Well, Ace Combat 5 is a team building exercise. I know, it sounds weird, but it's honestly a charming attempt to intertwine the events of the game with the gameplay. Introducing Binary Domain. It's relatively unknown third-person shooter from the creators of Yakuza from 2012. In Binary Domain you can pick and choose different team members in different missions, and in these individual segments, voice commands can be given to your team members to help you out in various ways. Not only that, but you may also take a part in different conversations as well. The cool thing about this is that you can build a relationship based on how well you perform in missions and how you converse with these characters. Granted, this system is not perfect, and voice commands are optional.
What'd you just say?
Bo,
What'd you just say?
I like you.
Yo, it's not funny. Drop it, man. You're draining my will to live.
That's what she said. Ace Combat 5 has a similar, though more simplistic feature that uses gamepad. Within the missions you can give commands to your squadron members, and occasionally you may answer a yes or no question, which leads to different, often entertaining exchanges. Unlike in Binary Domain, it's inconsequential, and like in Binary Domain, it's a gimmick, but a great one nonetheless, because finally, after 4 games, you may for the first time express yourself other than with bullets, missiles and bombs. At the same time, you can become much more acquainted with your squadron members, but I am getting ahead of myself. As a squadron leader, you may also procure planes not just for you but also for your teammates. Flymates? Teammates, flymates. Granted, they cannot die, but choosing right planes for them may result in smoother missions, as they can be pretty competent, especially if you make a good use of command system. Although usually it means you pass on them the shitty old plane and keep a new one, the same way a sibling gets your old clothes. And Ace Combat 5 is tight when it comes to difficulty. The overall gameplay is basically carbon copy of Ace Combat 4, but the minor details have been polished and fleshed out. Ace Combat 5 doesn't have a return line. Instead, missions are carefully curated in such a way that requires effectivity. Failure often demands change of loadout and strategy. Whereas I was a little bit lost at seas on how to dodge missiles and hit missiles in Ace Combat 4, here you just gotta get good, scrub. Alternative weapons are all useful, often suited or required for specific scenarios. And while 4 air-to-air remains the king of the hill, I mean, look at this final boss fight on hard difficulty, it has received a strong competition in form of semi-guided long-range missile, which is basically your equivalent of Ace Combat sniper rifle. Locking on 2 planes and sniping them both at the same time feels blissfully pleasant, and it's also much more interactive. And cluster bombs equal to quite some war crimes, let me tell you. And all in all, Ace Combat 5 is difficult, but fair and satisfying, with clutch and creative mission design. I absolutely adore the final boss in form of falling nuclear launcher satellite. Yes, that's a thing in Strange Real. These guys are simply savage. You have to dodge its falling pieces and find weak spot at the same time. It's not necessarily the hardest boss in the series or in the game, but I think it's the best one. And there are no bullshit missions. Oh look! New Tom Scott video.
The Catesby Tunnel in Northamptonshire, England, used to be constructed.
One thing that needs to be noted about story of Ace Combat 5 is that its successful attempt to connect with the gameplay has had a side effect. See, there is a paradox in genius of Ace Combat 4. Only thanks to the isolation from the gameplay events, it was allowed to be written in such impactful and meaningful way. And once you marry the storytelling and gameplay, the events will inevitably become, well, video gaming. Think of it this way. How would you turn war drama or anti-war movie into a video game? It would probably require its quiet, tense moments to emphasize the heavy reality that has descended upon the actors. There are games like that. Take This War of Mine, which focuses on survival of civilians within a war zone. It's a resource management game that questions players' morality and pits it against a sheer will to survive. Though such theme is not exactly fitting for an air combat centered game. An action movie, on the other hand, let's say Top Gun, is much better fit, and is also low-hanging fruit because it's a very likely inspiration for Ace Combat series to begin with, but Top Gun is more than less an advert for military-industrial complex. So even if we were to turn Top Gun into anti-war movie, there is still need for adrenaline-driven sky-high dogfighting sequences, camaraderie between the pilots, and cool-looking shots and mechanic-filled airfield strips, which is exactly what Ace Combat 5 did to allow the aforementioned marriage of gameplay and story. But the high-octane action surely muds the waters of the anti-war messaging. What welcomes you is a tale about Belka, a nation that blew its border with nukes, because they were about to lose a war that they started. Is this a foreshadowing or just a cautionary tale? I think it's a clever way of introducing an ever-present suspense to the story. No matter how much fun you are about to have, at any point a nuclear conflict between two superpowers may arise. But now, welcome to the Sand Island Blaze. Here are your squadron members from the Ocean Wardog unit. Talkative, cynical, but trusty Chopper, young and hopeful Grim, and contemplative and dreamy Nagase, who I assume is a crush of many Ace Combat fans, to which I raise a toast. Good choice. The hopeful atmosphere of training is quickly interrupted by an unexpected sortie. An intrusion from the Yuktobanian air forces turns out to be an incident which omens an upcoming war between once allied nations. And to no one's surprise, Yuktobania indeed attacks, Pearl Harbor style, and fully blown out war begins. And as it happens, all those who can carry their arms are called into action, including your newbie squadron. What follows is a long series of battles in air, on the sea and on the ground, in which you bond with your brothers and sister in arms, with help of aforementioned response and command system. One thing that definitely bothered me is how player-centric the game is. Anything you do immediately earns you a necessary amount of praise from nearly everyone around you.
Amazing! I don't think I'll ever be as good as Blaze.
He just disabled a moving truck with a grenade while jumping off a horse. Incredible.
Look at the way the captain moves. So that's how an ace pilot flies. Blaze just keeps surprising me. He's getting better every second.
And here I was thinking, this is my job description. But no, it's an act of a celestial entity that has graced everyone with its omnipresence. You are special. I don't know, you are. Okay. I do not mind a little bit of patting on the back, but too much sugar will ruin your cake. The incredible level of infamy earns you title of Demons of Razgris, a mythical creature from Strange Realms mythology, and with help of sheer power of will and anime planes carrying hundreds of rockets, an unlikely end to the war is on the horizon, after you emerge victorious out of many seemingly suicidal missions, which, if you keep attention, surely seem at least a little bit off, like when your commander flips a coin on which mission to send you on. So here is the twist, and a spoiler warning. A Balkan-based military procurement company that supplies both sides of the conflict, alongside with warmongering elements from both Osea and Yuktobania, has orchestrated this entire war event. And because your squadron is doing too good of a job, you need to be eliminated, which obviously doesn't work out because you are just too good.
Brave Sir Robin ran away. No! Bravely ran away, away. I didn't!
It reminded me a bit of First Israeli War, where Czechoslovakia, which is the country from Czechia descended, obviously, supplied Israel with weapons and Rust Bucket Air Force, and for that reason Israel holds us in high regard. However, we have also sold weapons to Egypt, which was one of the attacking nations in said war, and they also remember our deeds fondly, so it's a little bit ironic, but also gives us an interesting view on bias that happens when we remember historical events. And while we could argue that for this exact reason, the game must be about exploitative nature of military-industrial complex, I think the main message is different. After all, opportunists and fanatics alike will always attempt to seize positions of power. But if we want to keep democracy, peace and sovereignty, we ought to root out the real enemy: complacency. This theme is represented at many points within the game. One of the strongest moments is when the Ocean vice president gathers people, dictator style, on a stadium, in order to have a speech about necessity of war, and people start to sing Yuktobanian anti-war song out loud, only for a massive dogfight to emerge above the stadium, which by the way is another assassination attempt against your squadron. In another mission, your anti-war allies that include recently freed President of Osea and Prime Minister of Yuktobania manage to persuade part of enemy fleet to join your side, which prompts an immediate friendly fire, despite the clear fact that the highest authority from both sides has out loud given them order to cease the hostilities. How quickly does the command chain crumble if the person holding the gun refuses to stop shooting? There are other well-produced ideas to talk about, such as Ocean spacecraft meant for scientific purposes that gets turned into an unreachable nuclear missile carrier that has to be unceremoniously shot down by none other but you, or the unlikely scenario of countless units from both sides of the conflict joining in final siege of Belka's military base, where the bad actors hold in one last final stand. So yeah, Ace Combat 5 doesn't necessarily try to figure out war, instead they won't tell you how to prevent it. If you don't protect your values and freedom in time of peace, you will have to do so in time of war. So yeah, I don't want to moralize, but you know, at least do the classics such as make sure to vote and look into the candidates beforehand, make sure you know what laws and why your current government is passing, and yada yada. I know it's not awfully original, but it's meaningful to say it out loud from time to time, especially in time when far-right is on the rise due to informational illiteracy. Oh well, I just wish we were honest and fair, but that's utopia.
Our journey is almost at an end, but we must not waver in our resolve to fight, to reclaim peace between the two nations.
However, there is yet another side of coin to Ace Combat 5's story. Satirical one, absolutely hilarious, and perhaps even fully self-aware of absurdity that video game conflicts describe. The amount of mental gymnastics describing the reasoning behind many events that appear in cutscenes, briefings, and the missions are insane. At first I found the logical consistencies slightly annoying, but almost immediately they have become a bottomless pit of entertainment. Whether it's the absolutely phantasmagorical mission briefings, poking fun of necessity for surreal scenarios to make for a good video game level. Coincidence? I don't think so. Illuminati level of connections, when President deduces that message is for him, because it contains the number equal to the amount of his voters.
Well, how about that? These are the numbers of votes I won in my presidential elections. Huh, this message was meant for me.
Insane flying style of retired ace.
That flying style. That isn't the Colonel, is it? Colonel? You mean Lee Colonel? The legendary pilot they used to call Hookbein the Raven during the last war?
Incredible.
Or the reveal of your instructor, then your mechanic, and then your ex-commander, all being retired Belkan aces. Usually I am critical towards such story elements, but this time around this ever-present tomfoolery made me enjoy myself a lot, whether all of it is intentionally goofy or not. Just so you understand, Ace Combat Zero is the 6th game in the franchise, and 3rd and last PlayStation 2 game. But since the 7th game is called Ace Combat 6, and 8th mainline game Ace Combat 7, let's stick with Zero. There is a reason why it's called Zero. It is a prequel after all, but damn, sometimes it feels like gaming companies let some evil eldritch deity to name their products. And indeed, what was thought as cautionary tale in Ace Combat 5 now becomes present reality. Belka is hungry, and a small seceded republic that used to be in Belka is one of their main courses. Though unlike Belka, Ustio Republic is doing well economically, as well as is supported by neighboring states. And so you, under callsign Cypher, become one of the many mercenaries that join its ranks to defend against the incoming Belkan menace. And boy, if you expect any major change to the formula, you'd be sorely mistaken. And I am eternally grateful for that, because I really enjoyed playing through Ace Combat 5. A lot. Which leads me to an interesting self-observation that maybe sometimes I could be a little bit hypocritical when I look at long-standing series and immediately dismiss them due to lack of any substantial innovation. The only real difference between Ace Combat and other series in this regard is that I really like Ace Combat. That begs the question, where is the line between fan service and exploitation of the same exact fanbase through re-release of same game assets over and over? How many Ace Combats, Far Cry's, Call of Duties, and FIFAs that look and play nearly identically is too much? I still stand strong behind the eventual need for evolution and reject unfair consumer practices, obviously, but if we look purely at the gameplay, assets, and visuals, where does fan service end and fan abuse begin? Can a game be both at once? Naturally, an answer is nowhere to be found, but I do think that one invisible factor plays a major role. The intent, whether you create with the intent to serve, leave a mark on the society, be it several individuals or masses, or intent to financially exploit people who enjoy a game because it's something they can connect with. And naturally, intentions behind video games are hidden in black box with many countless people involved, often coming from both sides of the barricade. It's sort of an invisible fight, where some are focused on delivering a meaningful experience and others on milking the customers as much as possible. Such is the nature of video games, and it's a process we can't see into direct, but we can reliably judge the result. And that's why it's worth to pry and analyze, even if the conclusion of the criticism results just in a bunch of assumptions. But back to Ace Combat. Even if the gameplay is virtually unchanged, Ace Combat Zero comes with really cool and experimental feature, a reputation or morality system. There are two kinds of targets in the missions. The green ones, those are dangerous enemies, and yellow ones, non-threatening targets, whether it's tents, supply depots, or heavily damaged planes. Ignoring them, sparing them, earns you Paragon points, and then you can save Rex on Vermeer. Easy choice if you ask me. Oh, wrong game. Or you can destroy these targets, which gets you quote-unquote negative rank of mercenary, and sweet credits. The cool bit is that the game does not see this as vehemently bad. In fact, you may focus on destroying as many yellow targets as possible to maximize the profit, and the game does not really put you into disadvantage for that. Quite the contrary. You will end up with additional credits making progression through the game easier. I like that, as it poses relatively intriguing moral dilemma.
Enemy jets scramble hopelessly to try and defend their friends and family, and you take them out. You hear the sounds of screaming and of air raid sirens, and just like every other target before, you take them out. You take them all out, burning everything until there is only silence. Is this worth it? How many points did you get?
Unfortunately, I found this system to be a little bit underwhelming. Because the targets themselves aren't any threat, I mostly ignored them for purely practical reasons. You know, not wasting my limited missiles and time on target practice against foes that can negatively affect my mission playthrough. Instead, I would appreciate some difficult choices. What if some anti-air defenses were placed on a school or hospital, or jamming planes would fly above highly populated area? That could easily earn them the yellow status, and player would have to face a decision to either risk civilian lives and infrastructure, but in exchange for gameplay advantage. Now that would be a proper moral quandary that could turn me into a noble knight who is unwilling to cross certain boundaries no matter what, or a cold-blooded mercenary who minimizes risks and maximizes paycheck. I just wish Ace Combat Zero would lean further into this system, especially since the potential is so great, but I still very much appreciate it. Oh, and X-29 is back, baby.
Son of a bitch.
The occupied Ustio government military placed all their hopes on a joint operation between Osea and the foreign mercenary forces. This, of course, can be found in any history book. But I noticed a strange similarity in the materials I gathered. There were several accounts about a mercenary, all followed by the code word demon.
And there it is, the art of storytelling. While the gameplay is nearly the exact same goodness throughout the series, each new iteration focuses differently on how to truly implement story into a video game, ending the PlayStation 2 trilogy with a loud bang. Ace Combat Zero tells a story of Balkan War through eyes of an investigative journalist who at first simply wants to cover the war itself, but eventually learns about the mysterious pilot, a legend who has turned the war around and perhaps managed to do even more. The journalist then embarks upon a journey to uncover our story, which is then, through interviews with war participants, mostly other pilots, pitted against the actual in-game events, which I have to say is pretty ingenious, creative, and perhaps something that was never done before. Naturally, the ranks of cruel mercenary, neutral soldier, and heavenly knight come into play and affect how your actions are described in said documentary-style interviews. Yet, somehow I felt let down by what I witnessed. Through all its innovation, the origin story of post-nuclear Belka just could not compete with Boy's growth into a man from Ace Combat 4, or camaraderie from Ace Combat 5. One major issue is the pacing of the story. The game shortly introduces the concept of documentary-style storytelling. Then, nothing. At first I was afraid that I must have skipped some of the cutscenes. Later I have forgotten that the documentary storyline even exists. Then it makes a short, surprising reappearance just to vanish again. Rinse and repeat. How to put it? I felt as if the documentary story was the alien from the Alien movie, showing up when I expected the least, and then quickly disappearing before I get to see too much.
Right before I deployed, my airspace assignments changed. Initially, my squadron was assigned to the stable Eastern Front. That was changed to Area B7.
Only at the end, the game reveals substantial amount of footage. However, what works for a movie monster doesn't go well with documentary. What also doesn't help is that the interviews themselves are fairly generic, which makes them perhaps believable on one hand, but at the same time they lack subtext, and all the underlying themes are rather tickled than tackled. I also wished that they would take into account some of the individual actions of yours. For example, one of the pilots in the interviews was damaged and subsequently spared by me, and I really hoped that she would recall that. She did not. I know, now I expect a little bit too much, but damn, this would be so mind-blowingly cool. Another problem is not necessarily game's fault, but it hurts the story regardless. It's the shock of country nuking itself. A cataclysmic event that has definitely shaped strange real society the same way that Hiroshima and Nagasaki did ours. Except, you know about the event beforehand because Ace Combat 5 has told us, hence why you should play Ace Combat 0 first. Oops. I would love to say how much the knowledge of what's to come would make me uncomfortably sprawl in my chair, awaiting the inevitable disaster, but instead I was mostly peeking at my watches, because it was nuke o'clock and those damn Balkans were still resisting.
You know what I noticed? Nobody panics when things go according to plan. Even if the plan is horrifying. If tomorrow I tell the press that like a gangbanger will get shot, or a truckload of soldiers will be blowing up, nobody panics. Because it's all part of the plan.
And yes, the inevitability and unease of impeding nuclear doom could still be a strong point of Ace Combat 0. What if you, Cypher, died in said nuclear explosion? The same way you were unexpectedly killed in Call of Duty 4 in one of the most shocking gaming moments of 2007. Instead, when it happens, it's in the most abstract form possible. I struggled a little bit to keep the plane afloat after the shockwave, and then sterile infographic briefly skimmed over the zones of impact and casualty numbers. That is all. Barely any contemplation from the game about the tragedy followed. But wait, that is not the end. A rogue group operating on Belka's territory wants to nuke everything! The ultimate fear of nuclear weapons lies in petty nature of this tool, that one day it may be used by chosen few leaders to obliterate Earth's population in escalatory situation, despite the fact that overwhelming majority of the people that enables said leaders will always be against such action regardless the circumstances, but also ultimately is helpless in such scenario. Yet the final threat, terrorist group called World Without Borders, presents nuclear Armageddon as some final answer, a reset button that will allow us begin anew in world without any borders, washed off its sins and past. It's perhaps a fitting idea for a Bond villain, but it certainly isn't worthy of a serious anti-war game. It works in Ace Combat 5 because villains there are simply evil. They are just bitter about the past and want revenge, and the only reason why they want to nuke everything is because they lost and want to take the rest of the world down with them. They are just petty, and that's it, that's why it works. But creating world without borders by nuking everyone and everything feels like such a fanatical, short-sighted, and absurd take that can hardly ever be taken seriously. How could it, when it's the literal interpretation of an abstract concept? It doesn't feel like a real threat. It's just a nihilistic and unlikely outcome that doesn't really provide any further insight about humanity or war. And lastly, and once again, it won't create any tension since I knew it will not have happened because this is prequel. I know the future. Oh, and your buddy, Pixie, who unexpectedly leaves you, turns out to be the sad main villain, in a twist that no one saw coming. Oh, and then he appears to be the main interviewee in the documentary. Actually, I did not see that one coming. Outstanding move, Ace Combat Zero. Outstanding move. So, here's the deal. Ace Combat Zero comes with some fantastic ideas on how to spice up gameplay with a bit of morality and connect story with said gameplay at the same time. But it underutilizes all of its unique strengths and fails to really dip into its potential. I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed playing through this, don't get me wrong. The game even ended with this epic final boss fight where you and your buddy engage in a bullfighting, well, sort of, as this epic guitar solo rocks in the background. But damn, isn't it a tiny bit of letdown to see such potent storytelling concept that connects gameplay, story, and morality of your actions within the game to be wasted like this?
Yo, buddy. Still alive? And thanks, friend. See you again.